Yes, when I started as a judge in January 1990, after a couple of months only, after half a year, I was invited to join the team of the Ministry of Justice in Mainz. And one of their projects, and one of many projects I was in charge of there, was setting up this institute because there had just been ideas. It was not really a project yet, but it was then turned into a project. And in November 91, there was a big event organized in Trier to present this idea, and it was not more than an idea then, to the European public. And the basis for that was that the European Parliament had made available some money in order to pay the costs of such event. Because the European Parliament, as really the first and greatest promoter of ERA, had always been calling for years already for setting up such an institute. And then there was one member of the European Parliament coming from this region, Horst Langes, who said, well, why don't we create this in Trier? Because in Trier, there are other institutes which are similar, such as the German Judicial Academy. So the original idea was to set up a European Justice Academy. But then, of course, if it's in Trier, you have to involve the local government, if not the national. But the national government, at the time in Bonn, said, well, we are not so sure that this is a project which will really succeed. The local government, yes, was very much interested, and the justice minister at the time was a lawyer by profession. So he said, why an academy, European academy, only for judges? It should be for all legal professionals. And that was the next step. So then the planning started on that basis. And with this support, financial support from the European Parliament, which at the time was able to make this available without further legal basis, we started and we prepared this. And they, in Mainz, at the Ministry of Justice, where the minister said, yes, we will be part of it, they had no clue how to do it. They had no clue how to reach out to the other member states and so on. So that is how I got involved. Because they knew that I had, I mean, just as a trainee, a legal trainee, I had worked in Portugal and I had some international experience, not very much, but I had some ideas on that. And so I got involved. That was the start. And then they asked me, after this opening event, which it was called, it was labeled Opening of the Academy of European Law, although there was nothing to be opened. It was just a publicity, a PR event. But it was very successful because we managed to have more than 200 participants from all over the member states, at the time only 12, plus the then candidate countries, which were Sweden, Austria, Finland, and Norway, which then rejected membership in this subsequent referendum. But they came from all of these countries. They came from all the legal professions. The CCB was present there already. The then president of the CCB, a Dutchman called Piet Wacky-Eisten, was one of the speakers. The Court of Justice was on board. They were also, together with the Parliament, very strong promoters of ERA in the very early days. So the president of the Court of Justice spoke at the event. There was one of the top judges, Rodriguez Iglesias, the later president of the court, who was then participating in a roundtable discussing elements of what is the relation between European law, EU law, EC law at the time, and national law. Still a very topical issue, and so on. So at the end of the day, everyone said, well, the good news was that it was a success. The bad news is that now we have to continue and to put it into action. To be honest, I really did not have a concrete vision of how it would look like. But it was, for me, it was really clear from the outset that it could only succeed at all if it is a genuine European institute. And that is what lacked in the first years. I mean, we had Luxembourg as a co-founder and a founding patron, as the only member state at all, because Germany was not a founding member state. Germany only joined 2 years later. And it was a real struggle to make the other member states at the level of governments aware that this institute is there, waiting for their involvement, and that it would offer something to them. That was took a very long time. You have to build confidence. You have to build context, as I said before, the networks. You have to show, to prove that you deliver quality. Because everyone can say, well, we are now European, we are for you. We offer you services which you have ignored so far, that you need them, but that doesn't help. I remember that in these first years, the then German Justice Minister, who was a liberal as the local Justice Minister, so they were party friends, and he could be motivated to become active. So he wrote to all his homologues in the other 11 member states of the European Union at the time that we have now in Trier this institute after ERA, as a foundation was set up in '92. And he didn't receive a single answer except for the British Lord Chancellor, who answered, "Dear Klaus, this is a very interesting project, but perhaps we should see how it develops." And none, as I said, even bothered to answer on substance. None said, yes, we will be on board or so. They just ignored it. It was not very friendly. But you see that it is different. The European University Institute, for example, is based on an international public law treaty where all the member states were on board from the outset. That is a completely different situation. We had to start with just one member state. We had to build, we had to develop. And if an institute is there which already works, even after years, so at some stage some member states who had not joined yet would say, well, but it works, so why should we? Why should we contribute to the capital of this foundation in order to be a formal member, a formal patron, if what you offer is already available anyway? So this was not a self-runner. Yes.
It must have taken some time and persistence.
That is why it took really from 2000 to 2018, 18 years, 19 years, in order to get all of them on board. And the first were the Irish, in fact. And the first asks, but who is on board already? Who else? But the then Attorney General in Ireland, Michael McDowell, had a personality who encouraged him to say, well, I don't care. I'm happy to be the first. And that broke the ice, but it didn't mean that all the others followed suit just like that. There were specific situations where I exactly knew that something which you could not really expect to come true would come true. For example, in the early days of making attempts to persuade the member states to accede. I remember I was in Italy, in Rome, talking to the Italian government to make them convinced to come on board. And at some stage I had the deep conviction that this would work if I offer them Italian as a working language of ERA, but in exchange they would have to contribute financially at the same level as Germany and Luxembourg. And it came like this. There was no indication that I could build on, but this assumption came true. I was really convinced. And the same in a completely different situation when we wanted to buy this former element, this former, how do you say, office of the Deutsche Bundesbank, in order to enlarge our facilities here. We needed the money from the German government, which was not willing to pay. So I went to Berlin, I talked to many people, and one evening before I had a meeting with the Bundestag, and there the Committee on Financial Affairs, I was convinced that this would come true again. Although again it was completely uncertain, and it came true. Via this approach, going through the Committee for Financial Affairs and not through the government, and they managed then to, in a way, force the government to give us the money. It came true. We were able to buy this part of the building and to convert it then into our own enlarged training center. So it's rather this sometimes foreseeing something which would happen, which is just a gut feeling, nothing more. That surprised me that it then indeed came true. Given that the start was ERA being just the creation of Luxembourg and Rhineland-Palatinate, the biggest challenge was that all member states would join. So I think this is the achievement which we have met just only in 2018. In 2018, with Estonia, we had the full number of member states becoming patrons of ERA. Took a very long time. It was the hardest to be achieved. Other achievements I think I'm really proud of is to have built up a team which is sticking together through thick and thin, as one says, and has managed to develop a high-quality program in a sustainable way, because the high quality of ERA's programs is what made the other development possible, only because we were able to provide this real added value in high-quality programming, made it possible that the member states then were finally, eventually convinced, persuaded to exceed. So these two elements, I would think, are those I'm proudest of. I mean, what makes us stand out, certainly in the first instance, is this European character which we have, not only at the institutional basis nowadays, but in view of what we offer and the quality of the experts speaking at ERA who come from all the member states and the institutions and all the legal professions. And in comparison to the rather few other genuine European institutes who are active in the education sector, we are the only one exclusively focusing on law, on European law. So these two elements, I think, are the ones making ERA unique. Not really. What I had was always good contacts to people who knew the scene, who had their own networks, who were true friends of ERA. We were really very lucky to enjoy the support of great friends, of people at all levels, at EU level, from the Parliament in particular, from the Council as well, and then at member state level as well. We have done a lot, and it was great fun as well for me personally to develop these networks into the member states and all the member states, because you can only manage to get people on board and member states on board and institutions on board if you build the right social and personal environment. They, of course, give you back also good advice, indications, what you should do or perhaps not. So on that basis, yes, but mentors, a single mentor, very few. But these single mentors, such as John Toulmin, for example, the former late president of our Board of Trustees, who did a lot to encourage us to stimulate developments and so on. He was a mentor in a sense to help us having ambitions which would then develop ERA in the right direction. But in a concrete context, it was in particular in the UK, where he, of course, could give the right advice in order to approach this or that political actor on the spot, and in some cases it worked, in others it did not. So yes, without the support of these mentors, but there were many, we wouldn't have worked the same way, we wouldn't have succeeded.
So you relied a lot on the importance of your network and the connections that you had.
Absolutely.
Do you think that's going to be important moving forward for ERA to maintain?
Definitely.
That network?
Definitely. This is indeed an advice for those who are in charge now, that this is a continuous effort to build up networks, to maintain them, and really to base that on excellent personal relations as well. This is key. I remember that a very good old Belgian friend said, and he was very right in saying that, c'est à travers l'amitié que se crée l'Europe. So you create Europe only through friendship with like-minded people. Well, one of the recommendations is, as I just said, to really build these networks and these personal relations which will make ERA's further development also sustainable again. And that is to be done at many levels. And you need very long breath in many contexts because you will not succeed at the first go in most cases. So there are elements, strategic targets where you need this obstination. You have to insist and to come back again and try again and again. And if you're obstinate enough at some stage, you will succeed. In other contexts, you have to be flexible. There are, of course, questions which are of minor importance where you can be very, very generous and flexible. But the key targets, the key strategic challenges, there you need a very long breath. Which means that you also need a long time. I mean, I was then director for more than 20 years, which paid out in the sense that I had the time to come again and again with regard, for example, to these accessions of member states to the foundation. Well, of course, the contact with the colleagues and also the contact with all these European counterparts, which now in the times of the pandemic have been limited for more than a year, or for almost a year, and which I already missed last year. But well, that's quite natural, I suppose. So I hope to stay in touch to some extent. I have been invited to the Board of Trustees, so the contact with the ERA boards will continue, and with the colleagues here anyway, for some time. I mean, this will diminish in the course of time. That's normal as well. But well, I have to discover new horizons. Well, so far it has felt rather than like an extended holiday. It's now turning a bit because whole January holidays is a bit strange now. So I start to realize really that the situation is different. But there's so much to tidy up at home. Having been very busy with my ERA work for many years, other things have been neglected at home. So I have to put some order into all the documents and memories which I have at home, and we will then see. Well, I have a vague idea of perhaps putting together some elements of ERA's history. I don't know. Perhaps we will see. Otherwise, I hope to be able, perhaps in summer, to be realistic, not really before, to travel again and to see friends all around Europe and to see.
Sounds like a good plan.